here. Welcome to all who are watching us, and I give you the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me? Is there some button that should be pushed?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. Oh, that works. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Pascal. And thanks to all of you for coming. Thank you to the Embassy of France. Thank you to my colleagues at the Atlantic. I appreciate it. Bernard, thank you for being here. Thank you for showing us this film. What we're going to do is we're going to talk for a few minutes, and then we're going to open up to questions. And there'll be two people with mics running up and down to help us. Let me just start by two quick observations. I don't know what the audience felt. Haven't had time to interview them yet. But I'm projecting a little bit and thinking that people's reactions to this film run along two planes. The first plane is that it's an astonishing film. It's a depressing film. It's a film that causes, at least me, to wonder if you were right when you told a group of Libyans that freedom will always triumph over tyranny. It's a film about the persistence of evil. It's a film of great bravery also. And so there's that level, and we'll talk about the film on that level. There's another level, which is the feeling as I'm sitting here, and I'm sure everyone else is sitting here, saying, Bernard, enough already. You're putting yourself in too much danger. You were watching this and thinking that at some point it becomes a kind of a why. Why do you insist? You're not old, but you're not young, as you note. Why do you insist on putting yourself in these dangerous positions? Then the double threat while you're making this of COVID. This is a question that I feel compelled to ask you. We can start wherever you want, with the personal or the political, or maybe they're all the same thing.
Personal question first. I put myself in danger, but much less than those who offer me the honor to accept me among them. This young lady who is with me in the trenches of Ukraine takes many more risks. The guy whom you saw, who drives me in the streets of Mogadishu, is dead a few weeks after I went there. One other guy of the Bancroft group died also in a terrorist attack like the one where I was and which I filmed. So the danger in which I put myself is nothing compared to, and not to speak about the sacrifice and the risk of the Peshmerga and of the PYG in Rojava.
Come back to this a little bit, but when our mutual friend Richard Plepler told me about this film, my first reaction, and we discussed this, was that in many ways you're the last man standing. And what I mean by that is there was a period in Western history, not so long ago, where you had figures across the globe. In America, this phenomenon that I'm just about to describe was personified mainly by John McCain, or principally by John McCain. But when I mean last man standing, I mean the idea that there is a moral necessity to engaging in what you might call enlightened interventionism. That just because someone lives in another country and is being oppressed, that oppression belongs to all of us. Do you feel like the last man standing right now? America has turned inward in a lot of ways. Western Europe is preoccupied with its own problems. Autocracy is on the rise across the globe. Terrorism has not been defeated across the globe. Is this a sad moment for you?
I cannot say that it is a joyful moment, and I went through very sad moments during the shooting of this film. Every return to Europe was more than depressing, of course, for the reason which I tell to this group of young students, among whom my granddaughter, who asked me the second question. I always feel guilty not to have stayed long enough, not to have done enough, and so on. Am I the last one standing? No, I don't think so. You cannot imagine how many humanitarian militants of NGO I met, and I meet since years on these sort of fields. The only thing is that it was difficult to go during this period. It was hard because of the regulations, because there was no planes, because etc., etc. But the goodwills are still there. The brave journalists harassing in France at least, their directors in order to continue to do their job are out of number. In Paris Match, they were all, it is true that I was in France, one of the last during this time to report, but because of all what I say, the journalists of Paris Match, they were starving to do that job.
But I'm not talking just about journalists, and you and I both know a lot of journalists who do this work. What I'm getting at is this: in the 1990s, when there was starvation in Somalia, famine in Somalia, the impulse in America was, well, we have to do something. Arguments about the level of what we do, but there was an understanding. Seeing starving people on CNN, America, biggest, wealthiest, most powerful country, has to do something. It ended up in Black Hawk Down, as you write in the book. And then we've had 2 successive interventions, Iraq, Afghanistan. And now, disagree with me if you will, but now when we see photographs, film from Tigray, for instance, now, of mass starvation, there doesn't seem to be the same impulse to say, we have to do something because there are other humans. Has something changed fundamentally in the way the West approaches the rest of the world?
There is 2 aspects. You are right, of course. And it is true that you have in America, for example, growing forces from the right and from the left who say that we should not care, that what is happening in Afghanistan or in Tigray does not concern America. But look at what happened in the days after the fall of Kabul. These groups of American veterans, this Pineapple Express operation, these telegram loops who organize themselves in order to save people in Kabul, to save companions of life and of fight sometimes. So there was a real, I feel it like this, in America, uprising of the public opinion, or part of it, veterans, for example, who were really angry, disgusted by what they thought to be a mistake and a fault. In France, it is the same. On one side, we have a rise of populism, of sovereignism, of cynicism, of egoism in the ruling circle, in the political parties, and so on. The extreme right has never been as powerful. But one example, a tragedy which I could not cover during this year, the Uyghur tragedy, the Uyghur in China. I tried. I did all that I could to get there. I could not. But you cannot imagine in France how tragically popular is the cause of Uyghur. You have tens of thousands of young people of the age of my granddaughter who feel concerned, whose heart beats at the same speed as the Uyghur. The Kurds. I did a movie before this one called Peshmerga. I built with my friend Tom Kaplan an organization in America, very well known in France too, called Justice for Kurds. The Kurds are popular. When we launch an initiative, it works. Peshmerga in France has become a word which I would not say everybody, but a lot of people know. So you have the two aspects. I really believe, and this is what makes me keeping optimistic and not sad, but not desperate. You have in the real vibrant forces of our societies, you have still the same spirit of solidarity and brotherhood as when I was a young man going to Afghanistan for the first time.
But let me push on this a little bit, not to be overly pessimistic, comparing myself to such an optimist. It's wonderful that there's agitation on behalf of the Uyghurs, that there's journalism on behalf of the Uyghurs. No one really seriously thinks that the situation is going to materially change for the Uyghurs, who are fighting and being put under the thumb of the world's most powerful autocracy. What is the solution to the Uyghur problem? You're talking about the beauty of resistance in the West and the bravery of individual Uyghurs in China, but you've done this for 50 years. What is the solution to a challenge like the Uyghurs?
For the Uyghur, for example, the solution, one option could be to do with them, for them and with them, what we did with the dissidents in Soviet Union in the 70s and the 80s, which was to organize some chains of solidarity, of brotherhood again, and of help between the West and them. For decades, at least for 2 decades, I heard it is unuseful. They are just a few handful of brave people, but they don't represent anything. They will be broken by the iron fist of the Russian Soviet dictatorship. At the end of the day, one day, one of a sudden, November 1989, the wall of Berlin broke because of all these little chains of solidarity, all these little rivers, plus Ronald Reagan, plus the bravery of Ronald Reagan, his audace, the Pope, John Paul II, a great writer, Solzhenitsyn, made the bridge. And the world changed. Who knows if the same will not happen for the Uyghur? Who knows what would happen if a brave administration in an important country of Europe or in America said the truth? Who knows what would happen if the big companies decided to boycott any product which is built with the blood of the slavery of Uyghur? And who knows what would happen if these secret and underground chains were built? Maybe one day you will see the Uyghur stronger than their dictators. I don't know, honestly. I'm serious.
What is the root of your optimism?
The root of my optimism is that sometimes it works. Sometimes it works. In Sarajevo, after 3 years of sadness, of despair, of shouts in the desert, a brave president, Bill Clinton, came in power. Another brave man, Jacques Chirac in France, came in power. And both of them decided to act and to do, and not to listen to the bad Cassanders who were saying that it would cost hundreds of thousands of boots on the ground to stop the massacre. They acted and it worked. It worked in a few days. In Afghanistan, everybody says that this endless war was unuseful, untrue. These deployments of troops in Afghanistan during 20 years worked. Under the umbrella of our soldiers, women liberated. A free press began to be built. A real civil society took birth. I'm witness of that. I made enough travels in Afghanistan to be able to feel it. Between the time when I was the ambassador of President Chirac in Afghanistan in 2002 and my last visit to Ahmad Massoud a few months ago, it was another world. So it works. When we accept to exert our responsibilities, our duty of humanity, it can work.
Did Joe Biden abdicate his responsibilities?
Is Joe Biden?
Did Joe Biden abdicate his responsibilities as an American leader?
Joe Biden, I'm so sorry for that, because though being a French, but I am an internationalist, so I think that...
You're on French territory, so it's a domestic...
Yeah, but I
discussion.
I am an American by spirit. I am one of those Frenchmen who know that they would not exist, they would not be born without the sacrifice of young American GIs debarking in Normandy. So I feel the right to speak about American politics. I was such a supporter of Joe Biden. I had so much hopes in him. I must admit that in the case of Afghanistan, he just implemented the program of Trump. Donald Trump dreamt it, Joe Biden did it. This is a very sad chain of consequences. That is the point, that is the situation. I want to do another thing which works, which makes me optimist. These women in Bangladesh, this Birangona, this story, it goes very quick in the film with the subtitle and so on, is incredible. Women in a Muslim country in 71 raped, giving birth to illegitimate children. In any Muslim country, and maybe in any country in this time, they would have been cursed, damned, and outlawed. They have been sacred and named heroines of the nation. This is a source of optimism. And this lady, my friend Sheikh Hasina, who is coming in France in a few days, woman, prime minister in a Muslim country, proud, strong, Democrat, in spite of this Islamist huge push. Another reason to be optimistic. So if we want, if we will, if we support those who wish and will and want, together we can. I really believe that.
I want you to come back to this.
Friend Barack Obama.
Yeah, Barack, that's a whole other conversation. We'll do that in the third hour of this conversation. That was a joke. Please don't worry. Come back to this question about American foreign policy. You've asserted your bona fides as a friend of America, but let's just go through it for 1 second. Somalia was a prelude. Then you have Afghanistan, and you have Iraq, of course. The question is, it's a question for all of us. Is goodwill or the desire to remove people from under the boot of a dictatorship or a religious or evil theocracy, that desire is fine. But do we have, and I'll include France in this question, you've had your country has had its own travails in West Africa and other places. Do we have the skill and the patience to actually do it? I mean, Afghanistan seems to be a perfect example of a cautionary tale. When the going gets tough, we did leave.
There are, if you allow me, two different stories here. In Afghanistan, it's something else. It's a historical and impossible to understand mistake. I read, I think, a lot of the things which have been published everywhere. I don't understand why America left. Honestly, it worked. The cost was low. It will be much higher now in all terms, in terms of security, in terms of a lot of things, in terms of credibility of the world, of America, and of the West, and so on. So for me, Afghanistan is just, I don't know, a mistake of history. On other matters like Libya, like Somalia, like Iraq, there is another point which is more difficult, which is true, is that goodwill is not enough. There is in the history of philosophy a theory, which is a theory of just wars. It starts with Saint Augustine. It goes to Grotius and Pufendorf, thinkers of the 16th and 17th century, and it even goes to Michael Walzer in America. There is a whole theory. A war to be just, entre guillemets, between comma, there is many conditions. You have the reason must be fair, it must be supported by a real will coming from the grassroots, from the people himself. There must be a continuity in the effort. There must be a sense of time. There are many conditions. And to wish, to will, and to decide is not enough. And this democratic messianism, this idea that democracy can just be proclaimed and all of a sudden appear like night, like day, after the obscurity of a film, is absurd. It is a modern idea, but unfaithful and turning its back to this complicated theory of just wars, which was fed by history of philosophy. So, just to will, no, of course not. And in the case of Libya, where America was leading from behind and France from ahead, I saw exactly what went wrong. It was not to intervene. This was fair. It was not to stop a bloodbath. We had this duty. It was to consider that the job was done and that the democracy would bloom in a minute after the military intervention. This was a tragic mistake.
Two more questions, and then we'll go to the audience. What do you say to young people in France, young people in America, who, let's use Iraq as an example, don't believe that it was naive goodwill that made Americans or made American leaders think that they can go into Iraq and make it a better place? What do you say to people in France and America and elsewhere who believe that their own countries have flawed enough records, historical records and current records, that they have no right to go into other countries, as you do as an individual, and say, this is how to make it better?
I tell them that it reminds me of the cynical, egoist way of thinking of the extreme right of my youth. Extreme right said that. Barricades everywhere, fortresses, wires around Europe, and so on. I know that some young people of the left say that. They just speak like the right. They just speak as if they believed that humanity was separated into different species. They just speak as if this was an old debate in philosophy between monogenism and polygenism, polygenism, which is the root of racism. They just think this way as racists. We are entitled to be Democrats in Afghanistan, in Somalia, in Syria. No reason to be Democrats. Forbidden to embrace the ideal of democracy and so on. The idea of democracy, another thing which astonishes me, is when I hear that democracy is a Western idea. Democracy is not a Western idea. It is a universal value. It is a universal desire which exists everywhere. I met so many people, so many women, for example, in my life, since Bangladesh, who really believe that they don't deserve to be cursed if they are raped, who really believe that they have to be proud of their face. You don't need to be a Westerner to believe that. And all this way of enclosing people in their supposed and alleged culture is just a disguise for racism.
Trying to merge the personal story, the way you've given over much of your life to the pursuit of justice for superfluous people, I think is the term, the very evocative term in the film, with some of the broad themes. One of the clues, at least to someone who knows you a little, one of the clues about your decisions might lie with your father's story. And I thought maybe before we go to questions, maybe you could talk a little bit about him and the role his heroism played in your development.
Yeah, I have the privilege to be the son of a hero. My father was a hero. He was engaged at 17 years old in Spain in the international brigades. He was a free fighter in the French Army of Africa. He was decorated in Monte Cassino, one of the most harsh and fierce battle of the Second World War. And when he was living, and maybe even more since he is dead, I have always had his example in mind. And I can tell you, at the end of the film, when I am on this stupid mountain, going down with the Peshmergas, I was not completely reassured. It was not 100% safe. I was held by a cable, and the cable was just fixed on a big stone. And I could not help thinking that if the stone was not as solid as it should be, what happened? What I had in mind, I tell you, it was the example of my father in much more dangerous situation, being one of the first to climb. This is ridiculous, maybe. It might sound ridiculous, but it is true. I had the image of him being among the first, climbing the Monte Cassino last mount to liberate it. I had that in mind. And probably having this in mind prevented me to be too much afraid, to resign, to tell Sirwan Barzami, take me up, and so on. So this is how an example works. And I really believe that it's never bad to try to be a little higher than oneself, a little grander than oneself, a little, we are what we are. Sometimes it is not bad to try to be a little better. And great examples can be a father, it can be a father in spirit, it can be a writer you admire, it can be a godfather, whatever, helps for that. And this is what helps me.
Why don't we go to questions? Thank you. If you raise your hand, someone with a mic will come to you. There's one right there.
Thank you. My question is about sort of economics, I guess. And, there are people who say basically there is a misunderstanding in the West and the degree of support for democracy may not be as high as we once thought. And the moment that people's living conditions stop improving and you see the whole Trente Glorieuses in French sort of coming to an end, then people are not as sure about democracy as they once were. So what would you say, I guess, in response to those folks who say, no, it's not about people's support for democracy, it's more about, capitalism works for them, but now it's more uncertain, so you have Gilets jaunes, you have Trump and everything like that?
Est-ce qu'il y a vraiment soutien pour la démocratie ou est-ce que c'est maintenant ça change? Do you understand the whole question?
Je peux traduire.
In France, in Europe and in the West, we have really two trends today. We have a trend and a rise of populism, which is of hate, of despise, or of fatigue of democracy. Hate, despise, or fatigue, as we never had since the 30s. This is clear. In front of that, my belief is that we have more than ever to believe, to give the example, and to act. It is an ideological battle. Battles are not only in the battlefields. There is battles in Washington, in Paris, and this one is the battle for democracy, the battle for liberal ideas, the battle against those who believe that civilizations are blocks and that they are confronted to each other. This is the battle. I believe that civilizations can come in, are not blocks. Elements of each of them can be separated from the block and migrate to another one. You can be a true Afghan citizen, proud of your Afghan roots and of your culture, and believe that the human rights, according to John Locke, are good, and you don't stop to be an Afghan. On the reverse, you can be a true American girl or boy and be impressed by the sense of hospitality of some Arab peoples and feel that this hospitality is not blocked and stuck in a supposed civilization, that it can be also imported in our way of life, and so on. This is the battle against the idea that civilizations are ontological, metaphysical blocks separated from each other.
Right. Yeah, you presented about a half dozen scenarios, all rather bleak. Do you draw a certain hierarchy? And in terms of optimism versus pessimism, how would you rate these different places around the world? And which stands the best chance of muddling through, and which is the direst case, the worst case?
Which is the
worst case scenario?
He said you feature a bunch of different places. Which ones, trying to paraphrase,
right,
give you the most hope? Which ones have the best chance to survive?
The worst place for me in these dispatches which you saw, the worst is probably the island of Lesbos, in the heart of Europe, in the nest of Europe. this place is probably the one which made me the most sad. It took weeks for me to recover from this trip to Lesbos. Why? Because they are absolutely alone. Because they have no way to defend themselves. Because you cannot be more vulnerable than these migrants of Lesbos. The Kurds, even if they are alone, I say it enough, they have valiant defenders. They have Peshmerga. They have generals defending them. The Afghans, in the night where they have been cast and dropped in the night. Few weeks ago, there is the young lion of Panjshir. There are the old commanders of Massoud the father and the young commander of Massoud the son. You have in the mountain of Panjshir, though the valley is under control by Taliban, in the mountains, you have people who are already preparing the new Afghanistan. In a way, even if the things are not comparable, like a great French general, General de Gaulle, preparing the new France on a little mic in exile in London. So this situation, as desperate as they can seem, are not completely lost because you have the capacity to fight. The migrants in Europe and sometimes in America during the last administration, this is the most desperate situation because there is no outcome, there is no way to defend yourself, not even lawyers, or when they are, they cannot pay them. I have tons of stories. I stayed a rather long time in Lesbos. I could tell you for hours. This for me is the abyss of sadness. When you can fight, there is hope. I've been taught that by my father.
Democracy and solidarity, I think, are very important points and should be supported. But to what extent do you think that some of the issues that we're facing today in places like Afghanistan, in places like Nigeria, have largely been caused by the Western perspective? We have created countries out of tribal structures. Afghanistan, I'm not an expert, but is tribal. Right? You're trying to create a country. While it may have been low cost to keep America in Afghanistan, how does that solve a problem long term without creating the solution from the bottom up, from the country itself, from the people itself? It's not sustainable. But the problem may have been created from the outside to begin with.
You know, the old mistakes should not be excuse for the young mistakes. Of course, the way of defining borders, especially in Africa, was not the best way and sometimes tragic errors. But I don't like the way in which we use that in order to excuse the corruption, the nullity, the cynicism of the new rulers the rulers since half a century of these countries. And it's too easy for the dictators of today to get excuse from the colonial mistakes in order to wash all their crimes and all their mistakes. So this is really what I believe. And in Afghanistan, the Taliban are not a creation of the English colonialism. They are a creation of many things. The main of them, the most important of them being an ideology, a political Islam, which has some roots and history, going through Iran, Algeria in the 90s, and so on. There is a long story of this political Islam, of which the Taliban are the provisional end. This is the big story. And if we remain stuck in the mistake of the English colonialism, imperialism, number one, it is an excuse for the real autocrats of today. Number two, it is the best way not to do anything and to abandon the victims to their terrible fates. Last question, I think. We have
Maybe the
few
last
minutes.
question.
3 minutes, okay.
I thought the film did a great job of highlighting, obviously, lots of places around the world that we don't normally experience ourselves. But looking back on 50 years of your activism doing this, do you see any progress for us as a civilization as a whole? Is the world trending one way historically, or are we just doomed to have these spots around the world where some countries rise up and then they sink, and it's just inevitable? Are we stuck? Are we moving? What do you think?
You know, you have three, roughly speaking, there are three conceptions of history which compete since a few centuries. You have the progressists who believe that it goes better and better. This is, for example, Marx. You have the pessimists and the declinists who think that they go worse and worse. Example, Spengler. And you have those who believe that it is an eternal return and circle. The example is Vico. Okay? I believe that these three theories are strong, beautiful, well expressed, that they produce the brilliant systems, but that they are equally false. I believe in none of them. I believe that history is made out of accidents, that sometimes a grain of sand can change the whole process, that you think that all is over, all is finished, and you have a crazy French general who launched a crazy appeal and who changed the face of France. You think that the humanity is going to heaven, and you have a crazy dictator who launches one of the worst massacre of the history. This was the China of Mao Zedong. So it depends on circumstances. It depends on men. It depends on so many things. History is unpredictable, and it is what we, humanity, humans, simple individuals, decide or try to do out of it. And this conception of the history as a perpetual accident is probably the real reason which makes me optimistic, in spite of all that I saw in my life. And this is my final reply with afterthought to the question of Jeffrey Goldberg.
No, thank you. And I want to thank the world's leading optimist for being with us tonight. It's been great. And thank you for making this beautiful film. I want to thank the French Embassy for hosting us, my colleagues at The Atlantic, everybody who's watching the live stream. And again, Bernard, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity, the first opportunity in America to see this film. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Please thank you. Thank you.